Hey guys, I just want to read you an update. This is the newest update by Brandon Downs on June 14th, 2022. It was covered on Action News Now, NBC, NBC 24, and Court On. So this is the best I can verify. I will read it. The San Mateo County, California. The Cameron Hooker case is heading to trial to determine if he should be labeled as a sexually violent predator. According to the San Mateo District Attorney's Office, the probable cause hearing finished on Monday after it was spread out over 2 weeks. The judge determined there was probable cause and continued the case forward to trial. Hooker will be back in court on September 14th, 2022 for setting of a jury trial. Hooker will be moved to the Coalinga State Hospital where he will receive treatment while waiting for the next trial date. If Hooker is guilty, he would remain in jail and receive mental health treatment. If he is found not guilty, he will be released on parole under certain conditions. Hooker is the Tehama County man convicted in the infamous Girl in the Box case for kidnapping a woman in 1977 and holding her as a sex slave in his home for 7 years. He is scheduled to be released from prison unless he is convicted in this case. I will put this link in the description box if you care to see it. If you see anything updated sooner than that, let me know. So have a great one. I hope you enjoy the video. It is partially narrated by Colleen Stan. Bye-bye.
On the morning of May 19th, 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan leaves Eugene, Oregon to visit a friend in Westwood, California, almost 400 miles away.
It was my friend's birthday that day, and I just decided that I was going to go down and surprise her. I went out and my car was on the blink and I couldn't get it to start. So I thought, oh, no problem, I'll just hitchhike.
In those days was the hippie type days. There was kids hitchhiking all over. She wanted to get out and go and do her own thing.
Well, I was young, and I just felt that I had the world at my disposal, you know.
Colleen manages to hitch rides with several truckers. By early afternoon, she makes it to Red Bluff, California, less than 100 miles west of her destination.
At Red Bluff, the truck drivers dropped me off at I-5, and I had to walk up the off-ramp up to Highway 36. So I start trying to hitch ride. There's 5 guys in there, and they're like, yeah, we'll give you a ride. We'll take you wherever you want to go. And I turned them down because I thought me and 5 guys wasn't a good match.
It is not long before another car stops. She is relieved to see a young couple with their baby.
I just saw this guy. He's really kind of geeky looking. And the lady, she looked pretty average. So I hopped in the back seat of their car. I noticed this guy, he's looking in the rearview mirror. I got kind of creepy feeling at that point. Five, 10 minutes goes by. They stopped at a gas station. And I got out and went into the bathroom. I don't know if it was God, an angel, whatever, but there was a voice, and it was telling me to jump out the window and run and never look back. And I just kept thinking, this is crazy. I get in the back seat of the car, and there's this strange wooden box sitting on the seat next to me that wasn't there before. And I looked at it, and I didn't know what it was, so I kind of ignored it. We probably traveled maybe another 20 minutes or so. And they asked me, is it all right if we stop and look at these ice caves? I was just gracious that they had stopped and given me the ride. So I said, if it's not going to take very long, that's fine. I don't care. And so he turns on this road. So they stopped, and the wife and the baby got out, and they went down to this little creek. And I'm looking around wondering, well, what happened to this guy? Where'd he go? So he puts this box over my head. It had hinges, so it kind of opened up like a clam or something. Went over your head, had a hole for your neck, so that your head is totally encased inside this box when it's closed up. The box was very confining, very claustrophobic, and he had insulated it with carpet so that if I should yell out, nobody's going to hear me. I was very frightened, and of course I'm just wondering, what are these people going to do to me? Are they going to kill me? Are they going to rape me? I hear the woman and the baby getting back in the car, and he starts the car in. They turn around, go back to the highway.
Colleen is driven back to Red Bluff, to a small home on Oak Street. The box is taken off her head, and still blindfolded, she is led inside the house and down into its basement.
So here I am, suspended by my wrist. It was very painful. And he starts whipping me. I see him and his wife, and they're having sex. And I guess he finished having sex with his wife. He comes over, and he's putting his hands on me and running his hands up and down my body, and I blacked out.
When Colleen regains consciousness, she is being unhooked from the ceiling.
He walked me across the basement to a corner of the basement, and he had this, for lack of a better way to describe it, it was like a crate box. I'm blindfolded, I didn't see it, but I can just tell from when I sat in it, that's what it felt like. He put the head box back on my head, and he just went away. And so that was basically the first night that he had me.
In May of 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan is kidnapped by a young couple and taken to their home in Red Bluff, California, where she is subjected to pain, torture, and degradation throughout the night.
I was totally freaked out, very panicked, and just totally terrorized by everything that was happening to me.
The man tortures her daily.
And the only thing he would ever say to me was to give me a command, tell me to get up, stand up, shut up.
It is not only the male abductor who torments Colleen.
His wife, for what reasons I don't know, she came over and she bit me in my side while I was hanging there.
Colleen soon learns the woman's name.
When they were down in the basement and tortured me, and he said, "Jan, get something." So I knew her name was Jan.
But what Colleen doesn't know is that Jan is Janice Hooker, and she's just happy to have someone else take her place. In 1973, Janice is a plain, insecure 15-year-old suffering from epilepsy and low self-esteem when she meets 19-year-old Cameron Hooker.
She'd never been allowed to date. She'd never been allowed to wear shorts, wear a two-piece bathing suit, for example. She was raised by overly strict parents. And so when Cameron Hooker entered her life, she had no experience. She was very naive. She was easily manipulated.
By all outward appearances, Cameron Hooker is an unremarkable individual.
Cameron was a very quiet type of person. In fact, when he first met Janice and he asked her out, she said, "You'll have to talk to my parents, but they've never allowed me to go out before." Cameron goes to the house and in a very short period of time convinces those overly strict parents to allow her to go out on a date with him.
On their first date, Cameron persuades Janice to allow him to undress her and tie her to a tree, suspended by her wrists.
Cameron Hooker is a sexual sadist. A sexual sadist is an individual who is aroused by the suffering and fear of another person. It's not the infliction of pain that's arousing to the sexual sadist, it's the suffering of the victim. But however, he will use physical and emotional pain as tools to elicit that suffering.
This treatment is painful and humiliating to Janice, but she craves the affection Cameron shows her.
Janice initially agreed and went along with this because for the very first time in her life, she was allowed to date a young man. She had no frame of reference. She assumed that this was, in fact, sex.
Soon, Cameron is whipping Janice while she is suspended and staking her into the ground.
When Cameron Hooker was torturing Janice, it played into a long-term goal, and that was to shape her sexual responses, to shape her attitudes towards sex as being accepting of what was going on with him. It also convinced him that she was naive. It convinced him that she was easily manipulated and that he was going to be successful.
On January 18th, 1975, Cameron and Janice are married in Reno, Nevada. His treatment of her only gets worse.
He wants to have a sexual slave. Janice is going to be his first sexual slave.
But after several years, the level of cruelty escalates to a point where Janice can no longer take it.
Cameron wanted to have a sex slave, a woman who he could perform bondage on, who couldn't say no. Janice wanted to have a child, so they agreed that Cameron could have this sex slave. Janice would get pregnant and have a child, and he would practice bondage on the person who would be kept against her will.
Now, to you and I, that sounds crazy. She couldn't possibly agree to such a thing as this. But what we have to understand is that he had a very pliable personality to work with from the get-go.
In Janice, Cameron Hooker has created a compliant victim.
A compliant victim is a woman who is compliant or acquiescent in her own victimization in return for some trade-off. He rewards her by allowing her to have a baby. He will exchange her having a baby in return for his being able to have a slave.
So she agreed to this, but part of the agreement was he could have a slave, but he was not to have any sex with the slave. The sex was reserved for her.
More than 1 week after she is last heard from, Colleen's parents in California get a call from her roommates in Eugene, Oregon.
When she didn't show up, they called us. We decided to, go ahead and head up there and see, if we could find her.
They drive from Riverside, California to Eugene, Oregon. They report their daughter missing at various police departments along the way. But Colleen has disappeared without a trace. Throughout the summer and fall of 1977, Colleen is kept naked and blindfolded in a coffin-like box built by her captor in the basement of the small home.
The first 3 months, I never even went out of the basement. I really wasn't ever in a situation the first, couple months to even try to escape. Pretty much the routine became he would come down in the evenings, give me something to eat, something to drink, let me use a bedpan, and then he would hang me up, whip me.
From Cameron Hooker's point of view, the isolation of the victim is extremely important. He doesn't want her to have any input from anyone else other than himself. He wants to become the absolute ruler of all aspects of her life.
By the end of 1977, the only world 20-year-old Colleen Stan knows is one of torture and captivity at the hands of Cameron Hooker and his wife, Janice, in their home in Red Bluff, California. In January of 1978, 9 months after abducting Colleen, Cameron Hooker gets an idea from an article in one of his bondage magazines.
Pornography played a very important role in the shaping of Cameron Hooker's sadistic and violent fantasies by giving him new ideas.
He came down one night, and his wife came down, and he makes me read through this contract, and it goes through all this kind of legal-like wording about how I'm signing over my body and soul to him, and that he owns me, that I couldn't say no to him for anything. In the contract, it stated that I was to address him as master or sir, and that I was to address her as ma'am.
The slave contract played a very important role as far as Cameron Hooker was concerned. Number one, it lent some legitimacy to what he was doing. Number two, it served as a prop for his sadistic fantasies, having a slave. And number three, it validated his power over another person, and specifically his power over Colleen Stan.
It also stated that he would affix a collar around my neck, which he did.
Cameron Hooker then takes things a step further by telling Colleen about an organization that enforces the slave contract, known only as the Company.
Cameron Hooker tells her that there's a company, that it's an underground network of slave traders.
Created to help keep slaves in line if they were disobedient or they tried to run away.
It was complete fantasy, but he made it seem to Colleen like reality. And all Colleen had to do was look at the situation she found herself in. After all, she had been kidnapped. She had been kept as a captive. Why wouldn't she believe in this company? Because that's the exact same situation she suddenly found herself in.
They were like, go ahead and pick up the phone. They're listening. Go ahead and walk out the door. They're watching the house. You might as well just put a shotgun to your head and pull the trigger, because they're going to get you.
Cameron tells Colleen that Janice was once a slave who tried to escape, and he married her to save her from being executed.
Janice Hooker went along with the stories about the company, quote unquote, because she was very used to his perverted fantasies. And this was just another minor exaggeration of his fantasy. It's certainly nothing for her to become concerned with. She had a kidnapped victim living in their home. That was a major issue. The company was a minor issue as far as Janice Hooker was concerned.
Once I signed the contract, he started bringing me upstairs to do things like clean the kitchen, do the dishes, mop the floor, whatever, do stuff like that.
Colleen's arrival in the household gave Janice Hooker two rewards. Number one, she no longer had to clean house. There was now a slave to clean house. And number two, she no longer had to suffer through the whipping and the beatings as much as she had in the past. That was a reward that she considered to be a very valid one.
But the humiliation and psychological torture continues.
Whenever he hollered out attention, no matter what I was doing, I was to run over to this archway, strip off my clothes, throw my hands up onto the top of this archway, and he grabbed a whip. And he whipped me.
Some people may ask, how can a person like Colleen Stan, who's had a relatively normal life, so quickly go into that slave mode? Human beings are very adaptable. We can adapt to almost anything. In this particular case, Colleen Stan's adapted to her new role in life, which was a slave.
I tried to be a good slave because I was too afraid of the company.
In February of 1978, Janice Hooker makes an unexpected suggestion to her husband.
She said something to him like, if you want to, you can have sex with, my slave name was Kay, with Kay. I think that she was thinking that he would honor the deal and not have sex with me. So he just marches his butt right on down to the basement, gets me out of the box, takes me upstairs, ties me up to the bed, and proceeded to start raping me. Well, I can hear her running into the bathroom and throwing up.
When Cameron Hooker starts having sexual intercourse with Colleen, what he was doing at that point was violating the pact or the agreement he had with his wife, and it changed the dynamics between Cameron Hooker and his wife.
Once that door was opened, there was no turning back. I would say that he was probably raping me at least once a month after the first occurrence.
4 months later, Cameron and Janice Hooker buy an acre of land off of Highway 99, just outside of Red Bluff, and move into a trailer home, taking Colleen with them. Because there is no basement in the new home, Cameron Hooker is forced to come up with a new way to keep Colleen confined.
They had a waterbed, and what he had did was he constructed these boxes underneath the pedestal of the waterbed. Basically, has me get down on my knees and tells me to crawl in this box. So I crawl in there, he closes it all up, and this is my new home, for lack of a better word.
Colleen spends the rest of 1978 living in the box under the bed. She is let out infrequently, usually to perform housework, or to be whipped, tortured, and raped by Cameron Hooker. Back at home, the length of time Colleen has been gone is taking a toll on her loved ones.
I was beginning to think that maybe she was in some kind of a cult or something, a lot of that was going on back in those days. Runaway kids that, would get in those cults.
Hundreds of miles away, Cameron Hooker has Colleen help him build a shed in the backyard so he has a place to string her up, whip her, and stretch her on a rack.
It's like a medieval device where they used to stretch the people and dismember them and kill them and those kinds of things in the old days. So he would wind it up, stretch me out. Everything hurts. Everything's being stretched. So I'm just praying, dear Lord, I'm going to die. Help me. So he messed me up pretty bad with that thing.
The amount of time Cameron spends with Colleen does not go unnoticed by Janice.
She was aware of everything all along. The only thing she didn't know about was the rapes that were occurring. But she knew about everything else that was going on. She was fully aware of it.
She felt some sense of relief because he was practicing the heavier bondage on Colleen, but she had other feelings as well.
She didn't like me, and she didn't like me being there.
Two years into her captivity, Cameron Hooker removes Colleen's collar and allows her to work outside in the garden.
When he takes the collar off of Colleen, he's convinced she won't escape because he has convinced her of the existence of the company. Besides, fear is her collar.
By December of 1980, Colleen, now 23, has been missing for 2.5 years. Her captor, Cameron Hooker, decides to give her a Christmas gift.
And he said, I'm going to allow you to call home. I didn't know why. And he said, but I'm right here. If you say anything that I don't want you to say, or if you screw up in any way, I'm cutting the phone off and I'm going to make you wish you hadn't said it.
I felt great to hear from her.
And he's like, well, why haven't you called? And I was really vague about it, as vague as I could possibly be about everything.
She didn't really sound like the old Colleen.
And then he's like, cut it off. And so he hung up the phone and the conversation was over.
It was really an exciting moment for us.
By early 1981, 23-year-old Colleen Stan has been held captive for almost 3 years by Cameron and Janice Hooker. Colleen is kept in a box under Cameron and Janice's bed. She is let out to perform household chores and to be subjected to torture and abuse.
Cameron Hooker was a sexual sadist. Cameron Hooker was the one who convinced Janice Hooker to allow him to act out his fantasy. Does that alleviate her responsibility? Does that reduce her responsibility in the commission of the crime? Absolutely not.
Whenever Janice is not home, Cameron rapes Colleen every chance he gets. Colleen has been granted certain freedoms by the Hookers, who know she will not disobey because of the company.
I was out working in the garden and jogging. But I never told anyone the truth about what was going on.
She has been programmed to believe that the company is watching her every move.
I truly and honestly believed in the company and that they would hurt me.
Colleen Stan came to accept what Cameron Hooker explained to her about her life, about the company, because that's all she was subjected to. The only perspective that she had on life was the perspective that was given to her within that twisted environment that she was kept in.
Colleen soon finds herself rewarded for her years of servitude.
It was in March of 1981. He said that the company had okayed it for me to go and have a visit with my family.
But before Colleen can see her family, she must first prove her loyalty.
He had me kneeling before him, and he handed me a shotgun. And he said to put it in my mouth and pull the trigger, which I did. I had to do what he was telling me to do. Otherwise, I was not going to go see my family.
On March 20th, Cameron takes Colleen to see her family in Riverside.
As we were driving down the interstate, he's prepping me what to say. He said to tell them that he was my fiance. He was going to a seminar down in the San Diego area, so he thought it was a good idea for me to go and spend some time with my family since I hadn't seen him in so long.
Cameron also tells Colleen her father's house is under surveillance by the company, and if she tries to tell the truth, the company will kill everyone inside.
I was not only scared for myself, but I was scared for my family or anybody else who may help me, that they would also harm those people.
She had lost quite a bit of weight, but she looked, pretty much all right. And he came with her. She introduced him as her boyfriend, I think, and then I didn't see him again till he come back.
Colleen provides few details about her life, and her family is reluctant to ask.
I didn't want to push her where she was because I was afraid then we wouldn't hear from her.
I felt that the company was watching, was listening, was there in the neighborhood, and I didn't want my family to get hurt, so of course I didn't want to say anything that would put them in jeopardy.
Colleen's visit comes to an end less than 24 hours later.
The phone rings, and I pick it up, and it's him. And he said, I'll be there in like 10 minutes. And my heart just sunk. I was like... So he shows up, and my dad's wife, she says, let me get a picture of you guys. In the meanwhile, they're asking him, questions like, well, where do you guys live? And can we get your address and your phone number? And he's making all these excuses and saying that, well, we're in the process of moving. We'll forward that information to you, which of course never happened because it was all a lie.
Cameron brings Colleen back to Red Bluff, where she suddenly finds what little freedoms she once had are now gone.
I was pretty much for 3 years after that exclusively locked up in the box.
And she was placed back in the box beneath the bed because he wanted to keep her off balance. He wanted to convince her that she was back in her role as a slave and take away from her any feelings of goodness that she experienced as a result of being free for that brief period of time.
Janice's feelings toward Colleen provide further reason for the isolation.
Janice would complain about Colleen. Cameron Hooker was spending a lot more time with Colleen than he was with Janice, and that did cause Janice to feel some jealousy towards Colleen.
She is only let out late at night to do housework or to be tortured and sexually abused by Cameron Hooker.
Cameron Hooker believes that women are evil. Women are evil and they deserve to be punished. He also believes that women are there for his own pleasure. And if they don't meet his needs for pleasure, then he can feel justified in punishing them.
The 3 years that I was in there was very hard on me.
In 1984, 7 years after her capture, Colleen is able to convince Cameron to let her take a job outside the home to help support the family. She works cleaning rooms at a local motel.
I was delighted just to be out of the box. And I was happy to be able to go out and work and whatever, just be anywhere but there and locked up in that box.
However, Colleen is reminded that being out of the box does not mean she is free.
At this point, they were letting me sleep in the back bathroom. They would put a chain around my neck and put it around the toilet.
Spurred on by the more open living arrangements, Cameron Hooker begins to have sex with his wife and Colleen on alternate nights.
There was no equality in the relationship between Cameron and Janice. None whatsoever. Cameron Hooker was always the dominant member of that family, of that relationship.
Emboldened by his power over both women in his life, he announces his plan to build a dungeon and collect more sex slaves.
One of the features of a sexual sadist is they enjoy power. Power over one becomes absolute. Power over two becomes absolute. If two are good, three would be better. It's simply proving to himself time and time again that he has the ability and the power to capture and control multiple human beings.
But the thought of being forced to share her husband with more women pushes Janice Hooker over the edge. Something changes inside of her.
Janice began to see Colleen as a human being, someone who had terrible things done to her. They began to have conversations, and they developed a relationship that worked against Cameron Hooker.
That's when the relationship took on a different perspective. It wasn't slave, wife, it was two women sharing equally Cameron Hooker.
Consumed by guilt and fearful of her husband's plans, on August 9th, 1984, Janice Hooker visits with the pastor of her church. She breaks down and tells him everything about Colleen.
So he, of course, says, well, this is unnatural, this is not good, you need to get out.
Taking the pastor's advice, Janice heads to the motel where Colleen works.
She says, the whole thing's a lie. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how could I believe this? And why is she waiting all this time to come to me and tell the truth? I mean, this is over 7 years later.
Colleen calls her father in Riverside to tell him she is coming home. But before leaving Red Bluff, Colleen speaks to Cameron Hooker one more time on her terms.
I go over to the bus station. I went out to the payphone outside the bus station, and I called him up and I told him I'm leaving and there's nothing you can do to stop me. He started crying, and I hung up the phone. I got on the bus and I left.
But Colleen would soon find out that, while no longer a slave, she is still not free from Cameron and Janice Hooker. In the summer of 1984, after 7 years of torture, abuse, and forced servitude, 27-year-old Colleen Stan escapes from her captors, Cameron and Janice Hooker.
It was fantastic. I was so happy. My family had many questions. And I didn't want to get into all the gory details because I already knew that they had suffered through so much.
But she eventually opens up.
She tells us that she was tortured and hung up and in a box. You know, it's hard to believe all the stuff that he had done to her and survive. You know.
Back in Red Bluff, Janice Hooker leaves her husband and goes to the police.
Janice Hooker was extremely emotional, and she was obviously very, very scared.
But when Janice first tells her story, she is surprised by the response.
I was very skeptical. You know, if somebody starts telling you about keeping somebody in a wooden box underneath their waterbed for virtually years on end, that's very difficult for me to believe.
It's extremely hard for people to understand how such a thing could occur. And the reason it's difficult for us is because we don't have a frame of reference. We don't have any experience with this type of person, this type of victim, or this type of crime.
The Red Bluff police contact Colleen, who confirms everything Janice has told them.
I think we spent 2 days down there interviewing her, trying to obtain as much information as we could to span a 7-year period of time that she was abducted.
Armed with Janice's confession and Colleen's statement, on August 22nd, 1984, police arrest Cameron Hooker.
I explained to him that he was being arrested for the sex crimes, the kidnapping, and false imprisonment. And I really expected that he would question some of those things. And he was just, yeah, okay, no problem. He had very, very little reaction at all.
Police search the Hooker residence and confiscate a number of items. But nothing that proves Colleen was held there against her will. They are unaware that since the arrest, Janice Hooker has returned to her husband. And under his orders, she destroys everything in the home that can be connected to Colleen.
It's very difficult for people to see Janice as a victim because we equate the word victim with a lack of responsibility for actions taken. She, in fact, was a perpetrator. She was an offender. But she was also a victim of Cameron Hooker. That doesn't mean she's not responsible for any criminal action she may have taken.
But Janice doesn't get rid of everything.
Christine McGuire and myself were in my office working and looking through some of the various magazines that he had, and this negative falls out. And I picked it up and put it to the light, and we discovered that it was a picture that Cameron had taken of the actual contract that he had Colleen sign.
The district attorney's office finally has the proof they need to take the case to trial, and Cameron Hooker is indicted on 10 counts of kidnapping and rape.
We were able to bring into evidence at the trial whips, chains, the stretcher, sensory deprivation head boxes. We had the slave contract. He kept Colleen in a box under his waterbed for a number of years. We were able to reconstruct that, put that in the center of the courtroom, and it sat there every day during the course of the trial.
Janice Hooker agrees to testify against her husband in exchange for immunity.
Surprisingly, Janice Hooker did very well once she got away from Cameron Hooker. She was surprisingly strong.
But the prosecution knows their case ultimately rests on the testimony of Colleen Stan.
Colleen appeared to the jury to be very calm. She didn't look like or sound like she was out for revenge. There were times when she would appear a bit surprised when she described her own behavior. She didn't quite understand why she did certain things or why certain things happened, but she left it to the experts to explain to the jury why certain things happened.
Experts like Dr. Chris Hatcher.
Dr. Chris Hatcher, he was a clinical psychologist. He was expert in captivity cases, and he was able to kind of pull everything together for the jury, explain why it was that despite the appearance that she was free to come and go, she really was never free to come and go. Cameron Hooker, what he did was he tortured her, he whipped her, he beat her, he cut off all light, all sound. He did this over a period of time, and he got her to the point where he could, in essence, break her and coerce her into a set of behaviors.
He helped me to understand that I didn't do anything wrong.
On October 18th, 1984, Cameron Hooker takes the stand in his own defense.
He told the jury flat out that he did kidnap her, and he kidnapped her because he did want a sex slave. But then at some point in time, he decided to set her free, but she chose to remain with him because he said by this time she had fallen in love with him. And he said that the sexual acts that he had with Colleen were in fact consensual and not rape.
His strategy doesn't work, and Cameron Hooker is found guilty on all 10 counts. On November 22nd, 1984, Cameron Hooker is sentenced to more than 100 years in prison for kidnapping, sex crimes, and for using a knife during a kidnapping.
Judge Clancy Knight, who presided over the trial and told the public at the time of sentencing that he was going to sentence Cameron Hooker to the maximum possible because he said that he was the most dangerous psychopath he had ever come up against. He appears to be the exact opposite of what he really is, and that he would be a danger to women as long as he lives.
After the trial, Janice Hooker settles into a life of anonymity. She refuses to discuss her life with Cameron Hooker or crimes against Colleen Stan.
I don't really have good feelings towards Jan because I feel that even though I feel that she was also a victim, but she was free and she had choice. And I think that she could have made the choice to put an end to this way sooner than she did. You know, Jan could have saved all of us.
Cameron Hooker is scheduled for release sometime in 2022.
I definitely feel that he's a danger to society. I don't feel that he should ever be let out. He's not changed, but he does have a parole date, and I guess the only thing I can hope is that maybe they won't let him out.